imagine for a moment how different life could have been if the ArcGIS platform was available during major events throughout history. And that is the question that we've put to today's participants. So how could the Esri platform have changed history? Would the American Civil War have turned out differently? Could Pompeii's residents have been saved from the eruption of Vesuvius? So in this session, our GIS professionals from across the globe take us on a trip down memory lane with a few twists, adding their mapping and GIS superpowers to revisit history. First up, we have Ebony Wicks taking us back more than a century to a cold April during 1912 and onto the deck of the RMS Titanic.
Okay, the Titanic. Who hasn't watched the movie? Whoa, really? Where have you been? Okay, so I had a little think about this, and I thought I'd just give you a little, since the people who haven't watched the movie or may not know what the situation is, it was a behemoth of a ship that was created to passenger customers across the Atlantic. So I just wanted this to show you that beautiful background. But it was a passenger liner. And it sank in the North Atlantic Ocean in the early morning of 15th April 1912 because it crashed into an iceberg, or the iceberg ripped into the ship. On her maiden voyage, didn't do very much, sank straight into the ocean and wasn't really explored till James Cameron came in because he wanted to make a movie that made billions and billions of dollars. But it is considered one of the deadliest commercial peacetime maritime disasters in modern history. Okay, so let's have a look at what happened here. I'm just going to quickly reload this. Ooh. Go to that one. Oops, sorry. You just saw everything. But let's just zoom in to the North Atlantic. Here. Oh, where's my map? Oh, there we go. There's my beautiful route. Okay, so on April 11th, it departed, and at 11:40 p.m., the lookout spotted an iceberg in the path of the Titanic, and only 37 seconds passed between the sighting of the iceberg and hitting it. So there wasn't very much time. They tried to get all the passengers off, and the Titanic snapped in half at some point and sank to the bottom of the ocean. And then other rescue ships started to come in the vicinity and pick up the stragglers. So in the movie, Jack dies. It was really sad. Insert tears here. There were 2,229 passengers. On a more serious note, the total survivors were 713. That's 32%. That was pretty bad. So what happened if GIS technology had been around? So first, we need some real-time monitoring. And yes, I could have gone into the complexities of having a 3D model of the Titanic with routing that showed the best way to get off the boat in case of a disaster. But that is one aspect of it. But the more helpful aspect would be if Captain Smith had an iOS phone or an Android phone, and he was in his berth. And as the ship entered a zone of extreme iceberg activity, he would have been conveniently alerted that there was an iceberg, that the ship was going to be entering an iceberg of an area of high concentration, and he needed to divert the ship immediately, not relying on the person who perhaps was not paying attention, but using the science behind it. And this is using GeoEvent server. So if other ships had passed in the area, they could have identified hazardous areas, and they could have a collaborative effect across the ArcGIS platform. And not only that, not only would Captain Smith get that alert on his phone, but you could have the operations dashboard. So someone in a major city monitoring all the vessels in the vicinity of the area, and as the distress call comes in, they could have, if the ship actually managed to still hit the iceberg, they could have monitored the surrounding vessels, They could have seen what the capacities of those vessels were and sent the necessary reinforcements to save as many people as possible. And if this was implemented at that time, we would have had, we would have been able to see Jack and Rose live a long and happy life, and their hearts and lives will go on. So that's how the ArcGIS platform would have helped change the history of the Titanic.
Thank you, Ebony. Clive Palmer called and will be ordering one of those with the new Titanic that he's building. Up next, Esri's Erik Whitner will change all of civilization, of course using 3D, taking a fresh look at how our urban spaces have grown and developed. Please welcome Erik Whitner.
So when I heard about this, what I was asked to do is figure out how GIS changed history. What I heard is, how has anything I've ever done in GIS actually ever changed history? That was kind of a tough question for me. Have I ever built a GP tool that changed history? No. Have I ever done a demo that changed history? Maybe, but I don't know about it. But I was thinking back through all the projects that I've touched throughout the years, and there's actually one where actually I could have actually had an impact. And this was this transit-oriented development. So City and County of Honolulu, they had a challenge. Their problem was this: they wanted to propose this light rail system that connected the east and west side of the city together. And they wanted to represent that and understand what that would mean to the area as a way to try and convince people to do this. And it was kind of a challenge for their political leadership because they were actually under attack. They had an opponent that they were running in an election who was actually trying to prevent them from building this system. So we actually did some GIS analysis, showed them what the impacts would be on the local communities in terms of the walkable area. We showed this to the people there, and they said, no, we're Americans, we'll only walk 500 meters. So we cut it down and showed them the number of people that this would actually affect in the area, and then started to show them if we actually develop these areas and add density in these areas, how many people could we capture who are going to come into the Honolulu region over the course of the next 40 years. So we realized we could capture about 80% of the 125,000 people that they know that they're going to add. And although that was good, they wanted to see it in an interactive way. They wanted to understand what that would mean in a visually compelling way so that they could present it back to the public and show people what this would look like. So we went in and we started trying to use the GIS to do that. And starting very, very simply, kind of similar to what we were doing here earlier, we actually created a 3D model of downtown Honolulu, starting with a series of textured buildings that we brought in to create a scene. They didn't have anything nearly as beautiful as Geelong, but they still had some examples that we could use. They had a collection of simple massing models that we could bring in and apply textures to show them what those buildings would look, the existing buildings looked like in greater detail. And then similar to Geelong, they had a database of building heights that we could grab and procedurally generate content, and then reach out, grab that light rail system out of their engineering software, bring that in, put it into the context of the larger city of Honolulu, and show people what this thing was going to look like when they looked out their window or their door, which neighborhoods it was going to go through, who was going to impact visually, interactively in this kind of 3D environment when we were working with them in public meetings. So here's that light rail system as it's dropped in Honolulu. Once we did that, the next question was, okay, you've got this giant rail line going through my neighborhood. How is this going to impact me? And so taking some of the proposed changes that the contractors were doing, dropping those buildings and giving people kind of an interactive experience to show them what adding density around these areas would mean. So naturally, if you're living in that neighborhood, you're looking at all these skyscrapers that are going to come in. You may or may not be happy. You may be excited about getting access to new amenities, or you may dislike them because you don't actually want more people in your neighborhood. Some of those designs were really simple 2D designs, so we could create representations of what those looked like at maximum build-out, or we could create representations of what they looked like in probable build-out. And the challenge was that nobody liked this. Everybody looked at it and said, I don't want more density. I like my neighborhood. I like the way it is. Don't make any changes. Let's leave it exactly as it is. So what we did is we showed them an alternate future. We said, what would happen if we don't do this? What if we don't add in a light rail system? First of all, the traffic is going to continue to be horrible and it's going to get worse. Second of all, that urban growth is going to go somewhere. And we know it's not going to go here. It's not going to go into our preserves, which are green. It's not going to go into our military bases. It's not going to go into our streams. It's not going to go into our existing public lands that can't be developed. It's not going to go at slopes over a certain amount. It's going to wind up in these remaining white areas here. And it's not going to go in the red areas because that's our urban growth boundary. So everything's got to go into this green area somewhere. And if you look at that green area, that's your open space. That's your agricultural space. That's your views out of your backyard. And so what we did is we took that space and we said, well, how likely is it to be developed? How likely is it to get bulldozed and turned into a set of houses? And we wrote a simple model that prioritized the landscape and figured out where the growth was most likely to go. And then we wrote a second model that nibbled at that. And it nibbled at the edges until it filled it with 125,000 people, enough units for all those people, and filled it in. And showed them, this is what's going to get whacked. This is what's going to get totally developed, and you're going to lose your open space. But if we add the density along this line, this purple area is what's going to get developed instead. So you're going to keep more of your open space. You're going to keep more of those things that you value in your community. But people didn't understand this. Even this was too hard to interpret. So we pushed it into a city engine. We actually generated these as large single-family home urban developments and showed people what the area behind their house was going to look like in 2050. Now, I thought we'd failed. The mayor who was in charge of pushing this forward, he didn't win re-election. The man who was opposing him, however, also didn't win re-election. It was a different one who was also pro-rail. And it actually changed history. They actually got it funded. So about 1 year afterwards, they got $3.2 billion in federal funding for building this light rail line between the east and west side of Honolulu. So that's probably the only time that any GIS work I've ever done has actually had an impact on changing history. That one felt pretty good. Thank you.
It's time now to put on a soldier's uniform and join Dr. Michael Goodchild as he takes us back to the time of the Confederates and the Unionists in the American Civil War during 1863's Battle of Gettysburg.
Are we okay? Yeah. We can also find cases like this where the presence of GIS probably caused more damage than because the GIS wasn't particularly accurate. This is in the town of Bruton in Somerset in England. But let's go to this question. If the South had had a GIS at Gettysburg. I'm very cognizant of the fact that Anne Kelly Knowles, who's a geographer at Middlebury College in upstate Vermont, decided to apply GIS to the Battle of Gettysburg. And the initial response from a lot of people was, what on earth can you say new about Gettysburg? And I've always thought that this was a very, very compelling argument because I've heard many, many times over the years, people have asked me the question, what can you point to that GIS was able to do that could not have been done in any other way without GIS? And I've recently used this example as one that I think is very compelling. So here's the Gettysburg campaign. The South is in red and moved very rapidly into southern Pennsylvania, into the north. The Northern Army responded by moving north, and they met at Gettysburg, which is in southern Pennsylvania, a small town. And here is a movie that was made quite recently on precisely this topic of what if the South had won the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg, as I say, is in southern Pennsylvania. The battle occurred July 1st to 3rd in 1863, and was certainly a key battle in the American Civil War, which ran from 1861 to 1865. The North, in fact, turned back the South, and this was the South's most northerly advance during the war, and the Battle of Gettysburg is seen as the turning point, which led eventually, although it still took 2 years, led eventually to victory for the North. So here are the cast of characters. Here's Robert E. Lee, the brilliant Southern commander. Cue the banjo music, please. And James Longstreet, who was one of Lee's underlings, and is long regarded as having failed to execute a key order of Lee, which is often held to have led eventually to the Southern defeat. What Ann Knowles has done is to re-examine that conclusion, and the entire analysis is based on view sheds. It's part of the historical record of the battle that views of the battle were tremendously critical. And Lee, whose headquarters were in the Lutheran cemetery, in the tower of the Lutheran cemetery, it's often argued that the boots that Robert E. Lee was wearing made a critical difference in what he could see from the headquarters. So Anne decided to explore this, and so on the left is Lee's view of the battle from the Lutheran cemetery. You can see the view shed in light gray, and you can see the Union line, and you can see that a lot of the Union line was not actually visible from Lee's headquarters. On the right is the view from Longstreet's position at near the Black Horse Tavern, and you can see that he could see a lot of the battlefield that Lee couldn't. And what happened is that Lee issued an order to Longstreet to move in a certain direction, and Longstreet realized that to do so would have taken the troops under the guns of the North, and so in fact countermanded the order. And Anne's argument is that this was a very straightforward issue of who could see what. And of course, visibility of the battlefield was tremendously important at this period. It wasn't until World War I that there was extensive use of aircraft for surveillance. So what you could see was tremendously important. So if Lee and Longstreet had had a GIS, had had the viewshed capability, had had the digital elevation model of this rolling terrain, then the battle might have turned out differently. A GIS would have let Lee see Longstreet's point of view. A GIS could have given a real-time bird's-eye view of the battle. Lee might have changed his orders to Longstreet. The South might have won the battle. If the South had won the battle, the South's invasion of the North might have crippled its industrial base. The South winning the war would have broken the U.S. apart. The U.S. would not have had the power to join the Allies in World War I, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here is very definitely a case where GIS would have changed the course of history. The outcome of the Battle of Gettysburg depended very much on who could see what at what time. Well, thanks.
Thank you for that, Michael. Up next, and going back to the age of the Roman Empire, as Alex Gear determines if there could have been an alternate ending for the people of Pompeii after the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 A.D.
All right. I feel a little bit funny following Dr. Goodchild when I read all his university texts, and I'm about to talk about if the people 2,000 years ago had the GIS platform. So, since it was settled in the 8th century, the region around Mount Vesuvius in the Bay of Naples attracted wealthy vacationers. So they wanted to soak up the sun and scenery. So by the turn of the 1st century AD, the town of Pompeii, which is about 8 kilometres from the mountain, it was a flourishing resort. Elegant houses lined the streets, which you can see in my lovely 3D scene of Pompeii here, which I take no credit for. It's a city engine scene available from Esri Inc. So the tourists, the townspeople, and the slaves bustled in and out of small factories and artisans' shops, taverns, and cafes. There were lots of bathhouses in Pompeii. So people gathered in the 20,000-seat arena, and they lounged in the open-air squares and marketplaces. So the real history. On August 24th, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted. It spewed tons of molten ash, pumice and sulfuric gas into the atmosphere to a height of 33 kilometres. A firestorm of poisonous vapours and molten debris engulfed the surrounding area, suffocating the inhabitants of Pompeii. So the city was buried until nothing remained to be seen of the once thriving community. Many people escaped, however those that stayed behind were crushed or buried alive in the pyroclastic surges. So it's a little bit sad. 16 years earlier, there had been a major earthquake and there were still signs of damage in the city. Now, early signs of the eruption included a series of minor earthquakes and underwater groundwater sources running out for several days prior to the eruption. So let's look at what our alternative option might be. So I think we know that we're probably not going to be able to avoid what happened, but as advancements in the use of technology, GIS technology, are helping deliver effective strategies in emergency management, one of our key things is sharing information with the public and sharing it early. So hopefully, if we get that information out and our people get what they need, they won't be in the danger zone. So what if Pompeii had a portal? It would be a great way, to share information. So Pompeii wasn't just a port town, it was a portal town. The residents could access information on their tablets anywhere at any time. And it seemed in 79 AD everyone had a tablet. The modern Roman town uses ArcGIS to engage the community and share information between the residents and the authority. So here's the Pompeii Portal homepage, and we can look at the city in 3D. We've got a bath finder app, so where's your nearest bath or leisure centre? Additionally, you can have a look at what are the top 10 things happening at the amphitheatre. So great, simple, focused apps. And now it's not all gladiators fighting and chariot races. The residents of Pompeii live in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, which is an active volcano. So some of this technological capability, which brings together all this, different types of information to deliver that complete situational awareness. We can crowdsource, we can do predictive modelling, and we can bring live feeds in. So in the event of an emergency, Portal also provides a mechanism for the authorities to facilitate this information sharing. So, like us, when we have software systems, so they like the acronym first and then try to think of the name to support that acronym. So here we have MAGMA, which is our Major Alert Ground Movement app. And this is based on an early warning system. So the people in Pompeii had grown a little bit complacent with the different earthquakes. Tremors were just something that happened. But in my alternate history, we took them more seriously. So we mapped our hazard areas and we made that information available. So as a resident, I can jump into MAGMA and I can put in my address. And I can take a look at what the hazard warning for where I live is. So this is a red zone, and if I click on that, it's just going to tell me that I need to evacuate now. It wants me to use Mappus Evacuatus, the Evacuation Planner, and this is where I can plan my routes. Now, there were no need for turn-by-turn directions. Basically, you went on and then you continued for several miles until you reached Rome. So it's quite a simple routing application. We can also bring in our Twitter information, which was around at the time. So look at all these tweets that are happening at the moment. And then there are these suspicious looking ones here. They look a little bit like tweets. So what's happening at the amphitheatre? Summer of 79 hashtag. Be sure to check out what's happening at the amphitheatre. But then this one's a little bit more serious. Oh, come on, internet. The internet was terrible in 79 AD. Did anyone else feel that tremor? So we can start to bring in that information from the public, and the authorities can get that information as well. I've actually talked about my 2 other apps. So I think to wrap up, what I will say is I don't think that we can avoid the volcanic eruption. But I think by leveraging the ArcGIS platform as an information and collaboration portal, the authorities could perhaps disseminate early warning information to the residents and provide tools for them to plan their appropriate evacuation routes. I did hear that unfortunately the 79 AD portal was an on-prem solution. It wasn't hosted, so all the technology was lost. So it took another 2,000 years for us to get that back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for a punny look at the Vesuvius eruption. Our final speaker today, Kate Levy, will bring us a little closer to home, taking us into the blazing red sands of the Australian outback. Kate will show us how GIS could have helped the nightmare situation of a vehicle breakdown.
Everybody get up.
Firstly, I'd like to commend my co-presenters on wanting to spare the lives of people 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It's very noble. But this is where you want to pay attention, because I'm going to perhaps one day save your own life and the future GIS generations. As we heard, I'm coming back closer to home. I'm not terrified of hitting an iceberg, but something that might happen to me is getting caught in our treacherous environment if I'm travelling across one of these roads, crossing the outback. And if any of you have ever done this sort of a trip, you'll know that the roads from WA, crossing from east to west, are long, and there is not very much there that's going to help you out if you get stuck. So you can see here that there's quite a few roads that cross here. There's really not much alternative. You could go the long way around, but that's going to take a very long time. So if you want to go more quickly, you're going to have to take one of these roads. So we have Air Highway, which is flat and quite barren. Great Central Road, also quite flat and barren. Are you picking up a theme here? And so on and so forth. Now, generally the advice, if you get stuck on one of these roads in the middle of nowhere, and you're out of range of communications, as generally happens, you're meant to stay with your car, which is pretty good advice, except sometimes that just isn't going to help you out. You can't rely on passers-by. So what I've got here is the app that's going to keep you safe. So it's not released yet. So no, Erik, I haven't changed history yet, but I will make sure that the app's available just after Esri. So I will be changing history quite soon. So this app is going to save your life in 3 different ways. First of all, you're going to get the location of the nearest well or any other facilities around you that might help save your life. The other thing it does is provide you information about those wells. So this is crowdsourced from other people who've done that same route, who've looked at those wells and can tell you if there's going to be enough water. The other thing that is available is a service that will actually track whether you are turning up where you're meant to be within the time frame that you should be getting there. If that doesn't happen, we can notify the authorities. So I'm going to just go on now to a bit of a sad tale, just to look at how GIS might have changed history for a couple of guys who were trying to cross it was the Canning Stock route. And this is about 10 years ago or so. So they set out, heading east down the route. You'll notice these icons here. These are about 50 different wells that are located along the route. Now, they broke down round about here, at this spot here. And they didn't know where they were. They didn't have enough supplies. They were out of communications range. So they decided to try and head for help. And they headed in this direction. They headed east. And they set up camp. And this is what the police found when they were looking. They ended up heading back to their car, and unfortunately, that's as far as they got. And they did perish on that spot. If they had gone 9 kilometres in the other direction, they would have found this well. History would have been changed. So we know the location of the wells, and I will note, you will have all heard that you can take these apps offline, so all of this information is going to be available to you on your smartphone without any sort of internet connection. We also need to know whether there's actually any water in those wells, because let's face it, I'm sure that some of those have dried up. Some of them will be good sources of water. So included in this application is information that has been sourced from other people. And here I have the Geoforms template, which allows me to provide information back to the app on what well it is, what date it was last monitored, and the water levels there. And that information goes straight back into the map. And so once you've got that on your device, there you go, you've got your information. And then finally, now this one is a pretty great feature. So this involves registering for the service. So service, we'll call it Mind the Gap. This is going to use the Geo Event extension, and it's going to use a processor that you may or may not have heard of. It's called the Gap Detector. Now you might not have seen this one demoed, because unlike other processors which show you data coming in and doing something, this one's all about data not coming in, so it doesn't make a visually exciting demonstration. But it could be very useful in this sort of situation. So looking at the map here on the left, this is a telecommunications coverage network coverage map. Not much use if you get stranded out here. You are not going to be able to make that call. So what happens when you register for this app? You register your phone details, and as soon as you start to travel, you're monitored as far as you are within that communications coverage. Once you go outside that network coverage area, you're not going to be sending those signals back anymore, and so that moment in time is registered. Now we know where you're going, and so we can calculate how long it should take you to get back within the coverage area. So if you don't arrive where you're meant to be within that time frame, that's when Geo Event extension can pick up that information and send an alert to the authorities to let them know that you haven't arrived when you're meant to be there. So that's the 3 ways that this app is going to save people's lives. It might save your life on your next holiday. And if I haven't yet convinced you that you need this app, let me just leave you with this thought. Based on actual events, don't become the next star of Wolf Creek Part 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And we do also owe a thank you for Landgate for actually providing real information to make Kate's new apps so convincing. And I do think we owe all of these session presenters a huge round of applause for taking a really quirky question and really addressing it and answering it in some very creative way. So please give them all a big round of applause.